Pretty recognizable sound. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about here for a long time in the rest of this lesson. But before we get into that, there are a lot of preliminary things that I want to go over so that everybody knows kind of what we need to review, some definitions or introduce some definitions and terms and techniques. So that's what I want to talk about in this video, is the things that you should already be on top of for working on what we're going to be talking about here with the blues. And a couple of definitions that are very important. The first, well, there are three important ones that we're going to break down into some other ones. And that is, the three main elements of music are rhythm, melody, and harmony. Blues. What is it? Is there an easy answer? I don't think so. That's a whole deep subject. We're going to go a lot into it, but we're not going to cover everything that possibly there is about blues just yet, because there's a lot involved. First of all, we have to figure out, what is it that makes something sound like blues? Is it this? Is that blues? Is it this? Maybe. Is it this? Maybe. Is it this? Well, the answer to all of those is, of course, yes. All of those are aspects of blues. And there are a lot more, too. It's like jazz. It's like every other style. There are so many different angles to it. But there are a lot of constants as well. And that's what we're going to talk about here, is what are some of the elements that make something blues as opposed to making it country or jazz or swing or punk or whatever. Now, so the roots of blues, of course, go back to well over 100 years, hundreds of years. We have our simple 12-bar blues, which we covered in the last segment. And again, that has 4 measures of chord 1, followed by 2 measures of chord 4, and 2 more measures of 1, then 2 measures of 5, and 2 measures of 1. What I'm going to talk about here is one of the most common variations on this. So we're going to call this 12-bar blues variation 1. And in case there might be 2, 3, 4, and 5 later on. But variation 1 is really going to introduce a couple of little changes, all minor changes. Or just we're going to have a couple of more chord changes in the measures. So now, 3 things are going to be different. 3 measures are going to be different from what we had in simple version. First thing that happens is, instead of having 4 measures of chord 4 in the beginning, which especially in a slow blues tune can get pretty monotonous, we're going to have a change in the second measure. So we're going to have 1 measure of E7 and go to chord 4 right away, and then back to chord 1 for the other 2 measures of that line. Again, so you really need to think about the 3 lines of 4 measures each as kind of independent elements. We have talked about playing 12-bar blues, simple and variation 1, in a way of just using 7th chords, using E7, A7, and B7, which would be chords 1, 4, and 5 in the key of E. What I want to talk about here is using power chords. Now, the first thing you might already know about power chords, a power chord is only 2 notes. It's not really a chord from a musical definition point of view. It's what we call an interval, because it's only 2 notes, and you can have duplicates of the same notes. It doesn't matter how many notes you play, how many different strings you play. But the 2 notes that make up a power chord are just the root of the chord and the 5th of the chord. Now, we're going to be talking about this in the key of A, and so our A chord, or our A power chord, is going to be chord 1 in this case. So we have down the idea of a power chord and playing through the 3 major chords in the key of A, D, and E, using just power chords. The first thing we could do now is drop that into a 12-bar blues progression. Most of the blues progressions we're going to be talking about for this segment will be what I'm calling variation 1. So going back to when we talked about 12-bar blues a little while ago, it's going to be the progression that has chord 1 for 1 measure, chord 4 for 1 measure, and then chord 1 for 2 more measures. Second line is 2 measures of chord 4, and then 2 measures of chord 1. Third line is 1 measure of 5, 1 measure of 4, 1 measure of 1, and the turnaround would be measure 5. I want to talk now a little bit about some variations we can do with the shuffle rhythm and progression to make it a little bit more interesting, or just some variations on it. Now, so we have the idea of playing the 12-bar blues in what I called variation 1, but that's the pattern that we have chord 4 in the second measure of the line. And then using our shuffle rhythm, we're alternating back and forth between the power chord, the 5 chord, and adding on the 6th note of the scale on the 2nd and 4th beats. Now I want to take a look at expanding that a little bit more, stretching our hands a little bit, and adding in the 7th note of the scale. Technically, the flatted 7th note of the scale. We've talked about the 12-bar blues shuffle using variation 1 in the key of A, and using just the simple shuffle, what I might consider a slight variation on it, with the addition of the 7th. So again, in the simple one, we just had an A5 or a power chord going to A6. And in the first variation, we added the flatted 7th. And we went through our 1-4-5 progression following the chord progression, or the arrangement of Allen's Blues, number 1 and 2, which are pretty much the same, except for the addition of the 7th in Allen's Blues number 2. What I want to talk about here is now how to extend that into other keys and playing them up the neck. Now, all of the three power chords we've played have all been we've been able to play them all with just one finger, because one of the notes of the power chord was open. So our 2 notes in the power chord were a 5th apart, but we were playing an A on the open 5th string, and then the E at the 2nd fret of the D string of the 4th string. Well, a power chord further up the neck requires you to use 2 fingers, one on the 5th string, and then your 3rd finger on the 4th string. So if we want to move this, for example, up to C, we're going to come to the 5th string, we're going to stay on the A string, and we're going to move to the 3rd fret. So the 3rd fret of the A string is the note C. And now, if I want to make a power chord there, I need to add my 3rd finger on the 4th string at the 5th fret. Now I have the same configuration of notes, 2 notes a 5th apart, a C on the 5th string and a G on the 4th string. I can now do that same simple shuffle rhythm by adding, it's a big stretch, but you got to work on this. I got to get in a good position to make this happen. So, good hand position is really important. Hand down low, thumb down low, not wrapped up around the top of the neck. If you're in the baseball bat grip position, this will not work, I guarantee it. So, get your thumb down low, make a little space down here, almost enough space down there for a golf ball in your hand. The golf ball's a little big, maybe a jacks ball or something, ping pong ball, something. You need room underneath your hand. Now, to stretch up to the 6th note, I have to get my 4th finger to reach to the 7th fret of the 4th string. I know it looks scary and it looks hard, but it's not, as long as you do a couple of really, really important things.